Meisters per Gimel Mishnah Aleph. Sagt the Mishnah, Hamaber Ta'ena B'Chateri Liktos. The Mishnah now goes back to the sugya of a chatzar that's kavel l'maiser. Any produce that comes into that chatzar will be kavel l'maiser, so it can no longer be eaten achilas arai without taking off meisters, as we explained. So Hamaber Ta'ena B'Chateri Liktos. If someone carries figs through his chatzar on his way to dry them out, his children and other members of his household may eat them as a snack, and are potter from separating meisters before they eat. Since these figs are going to be dried, it's not yet the gemar malacha, so therefore they may be eaten as a snack, achilas arai, despite having been brought into the owner's courtyard. The courtyard is not kavel l'maiser for produce that has not yet been fully processed. It's similar to the halacha of truma, according to the shitas hachachomim in Perek Beis, and selling according to shitas Rabbi Yehuda also. Okay. Weiter. Workers who help carry the figs to the place where he's going to dry them out are not entitled to eat them in Hatorah. Nevertheless, the owner may, if he wishes, allow them to eat, either as part of their wages or as an extra benefit. The Mishnah explains, and these workers may eat from the figs without separating meisus, and when this is also. So when the workers who are with him, the workers who help him carry the figs to the place where they'll be dried, when they do not have a right to get the food from him as part of their schar, and now he allows them to take some of the figs as a matana. When he hired them, he didn't agree to give them meals as part of their schar. While they were carrying figs, he told them he may take some. So they may eat the figs as a snack and are parted from separating meiser before they eat. This is because matana is not mechayev in meiser for produce the same way a sale does. However, if they do have a right to get food from him as part of their schar, then they may not eat the figs without first taking off meiser. In this case, the figs are payments for the workers. They are therefore considered to have been bought by them in exchange for their work. So the sale is kavel meiser and asks them from being eaten before separating meisers. Mishnah Beis. If someone takes his workers out to work in the field on his fig trees and they want to snack on the figs, so the Mishnah is going to continue that when workers may eat figs from which meiser has not yet been separated. Mishnah Aleph dealt with eating figs being brought in from the field through a chatzar to the place where it's going to be dried. Mishnah Beis is going to deal with eating figs while it's still in the sada, while it's still in the field. This Mishnah deals with the case of the workers who were not entitled to eat min Hatorah. The Torah allows workers to eat fruit from a tree while they are working on it, only when they are picking the fruit. The Mishnah speaks of a case where they were not picking the fruit, but working to improve the tree. Let's say they were hoeing and digging in the ground underneath it. So if someone takes his workers out to work in the field on his fig trees and they want to eat the figs while they're working, when they do not have the right to get food from the owner as part of their schar, but he allows them to take some figs anyways as a matana, they may eat the figs as a snack, achilas arai, and are part from separating meisers before eating. This is because a matana is not kavel l'maiser. But if the workers do have the right to get food from him as part of their schar, then the figs they eat are considered to have been bought by them, and once it's bought by them, this is kavel l'maiser, as we mentioned in the previous Mishnah. Therefore, they may eat without separating meisers only in the following way. They may pick and eat one fig at a time from the fig tree. This is because selling produce is not kavel l'maiser unless it has been processed, and one fruit by itself is not considered processed. But they may not eat even one fig at a time from a basket, or from a box, or from a pile of figs. Once the figs were combined, they're considered processed enough for the sale to aser eating them from achilas arai. There would be another case, there would be another hechatimsa of being kavel l'maiser. Mishnah Gimel. If someone hires a worker to work with them on olive trees, and when the worker agreed to the job, he said, I will only do it on the condition that I may eat the olives. If he eats one olive at a time, he's patur from taking off meiser. But if he combined two or more olives before eating them, he's mechuyev to separate meisers before he may eat them, as we explained in the previous Mishnah. He cannot take two at a time and eat them because the Chachamim treated two fruits together as a small pile. This pile is considered processed enough to allow the sale of these fruits to be kavel l'maiser, as we mentioned in Perek Beis. L'nakesh bab tzolim. Similarly, if someone hired a worker to weed a patch of onions, and the worker said to the owner, I'll only do this on the condition that I may eat the green leaves of the onion plants, mekartem ala olav oichel. The worker may pull off one leaf at a time and eat it without separating meisus from tziruf chayv. But if you combine 2 or more leaves before eating them, he's mechuyev to separate meisus before eating them. The halacha of this Mishnah for olives and onions is the same as the one for figs in the previous Mishnah. It's not clear why the Mishnah needs to repeat this rule in the case of olives and onions. What's the nafka mina? I guess it's just different types of pears and yerokas. Unclear. Mishnah Dalet. If someone found cut figs on the side of the road, which is a sign that they've been laid out to dry, figs that are laid out to dry are first cut off the tree to allow some of the juice to drain out. While they are drying, they're called ktzitzos or ktzios. Once they were dried out completely, they're known as gregres, dried figs, as we find the Mishnayos all the time. Afilu besides the ktzitzos, even if you found them next to a field of cut figs that had been laid out to dry, so it seems clear that they belong to the owner of the field. Similarly, if there's a fig tree with branches hanging over a road and someone found figs beneath it, so it seems clear that they fell from the tree. They're permitted in regard to stealing, meaning that someone who finds them may take them without any chashash of geneva or gzela, and they're part from meiser because they're like hefker. Because the person who owned them is assumed to have given up hope of getting them back. The halacha is when someone finds a lost object, he must return to its owner, must be mekayim the mitzvah of hashavas haveda. However, once the owner gives up hope of getting it back, it's a state of mind known as yiyush. The object becomes ownerless and may be kept by whoever finds it. When the figs are found lying on the side of the road, we may assume that the owner has given up hope of getting them back. This is because the figs that fall from the tree get smashed and dirty and no longer look like the figs on the tree. Since they cannot be positively identified as having come from that field or tree, they might have been dropped by someone passing by. The owner assumes that someone who finds them will take it for himself, like the Gemara in Bab Metzia and Daf Chaf Aleph Amud Beis explains. And something that's from Hefker is part of from Meiser, as we learned in the Klal Amru b'Meiser in Parak Aleph, Mishnah Aleph. However, if olives or carobs are found on the road beneath an olive or carob tree, they're not considered ownerless, they're not considered Hefker, and are mechuyev in Meiser. Here, the owner of the tree doesn't give up hope of getting back these fruits because they can be identified as having come from his tree even after falling onto the road. Obviously, the coloring of the fruits are going to be different. Someone finding olives or charuvim under a tree can easily identify whether they came from that tree. Unlike figs, these fruits are harder and tougher and don't become damaged much when they fall off the tree. So the owner of the tree therefore assumes that people passing by will not take them for themselves and will give them back because they're much easier to be identified. So therefore, someone who finds them must return them to the owner, who's then mechuyev to separate meisus from them. Matzah gregers. If someone found dried figs and it's not clear if their processing has been completed by squashing them into a barrel, so the halacha is like this. The Mishnah is going to discuss when someone finds completely dried figs, he must take off meisus from them. These figs were not found next to the field of dried figs or found in the middle of the road, let's say. Since there's no way of identifying the owner, they're considered hefker, and whoever finds them may keep them. However, this doesn't necessarily part of them from meisus, because ownerless produce, hefker, is only parted from meiser only if it was ownerless b'shas the gemar malacha. Once it was completely processed, once it was gemar malacha, and the meiser, and then it was kevel l'meiser, and there was already a chiyuv of meiser, it remains in effect even if the produce becomes hefker afterwards, meaning that b'shas the gemar malacha wasn't hefker yet. The question now becomes when can the finder assume that the figs were lost before they were finished, before there was a gemar malacha, and when must he be concerned that they were lost afterwards? So the Mishnah is going to tell us what the halacha is. So much of gregers, if someone found dried figs and it's not clear if the processing was completed, so the halacha is as follows: If most people in the city have already squashed their figs into barrels, the finder must assume that the ones he found had already been squashed before they were lost, and he's mechuyev to take off meisus from them. But if most people in that city did not yet squash the figs into barrels, he may assume that the ones he found had not yet been squashed, and he's not mechuyev to separate meisus from them. If he found pieces cut from a cake of figs, he's mechuyev to separate meisus from them. Because it's known if it's in a cake of figs, so it was known that it was something that already had a gemar malacha before it was lost. Regarding charuvin, carrots, before a person has gathered them into a pile on the top of the roof, which marks the end of their processing, which is the gemar malacha, he may take them down for the roof for his animal to eat, and he's not mechuyev to separate meisus from them, because he'll return the leftover bucks to the roof. It's mutter to feed an animal, Paris, or tfuah, that's not yet fully mechuyev ma'asros, even to give it its regular amount of food. Whatever is permitted to a person for achilas arai may be fed in regular amounts to an animal. The difference between achilas arai and eating regular meals applies only to people. Since these cheruvim were not yet gathered into a pile, they did not yet have gemar malacha, and they're still mutter bit achilas arai. He may therefore feed them to the animals. Okay. Mishnah Hey. Ezi chotzer shechayeves b'maisros. What's the kind of chotzer that's mechayev in maisros, which makes the produce that enters it fully mechayev b'maisros and atzuz achilas arai? Rabbi Shmuel says chotzer hatzoris shehakelim nishmar b'soicha, a chotzer from tzuri, in which the utensils, the kelim, are protected by the person who stands guard over the chotzer, like the chotzer of the city of Tzur. What's this mean? So many of the residents of Tzur, which was a city in Lebanon, were rich, and it was therefore common for them to hire watchmen to guard their courtyards. Rabbi Kiva Aimer, Kol sha'echad peseach v'echad noyal patura. Any chotzer that when a person living in it opens the door, another person living in it comes in and closes it, is not mechuyev in ma'aser. It doesn't establish a chiyuv ma'aser. A chotzer in which two people own homes and both have the right to decide when to keep the chotzer's door open and when to keep the door to the chotzer closed is not protected enough to be mechayev ma'aser, since the one who closes the door can never be sure it will fully stay closed. So according to Rabbi Kiva, a chotzer is not mechayev ma'aser unless there's just one person who decides when the door should be closed. However, if the chotzer is owned by one person and another person rents a home in it from him, Rabbi Kiva agrees that it's considered a chotzer hashamar, a protected courtyard. This is because the owner can overrule the renter when he wants and insist that the door be kept closed. Rabbi Nechemia says, Kol she'ein odom boish milechel b'seichu chayeves. Any chotzer which a person is not embarrassed to eat in it is mechayev. According to Rabbi Nechemia, a chotzer must provide enough privacy to allow a person to eat in it comfortably before it can be kevel l'maiser. Rabbi Nechemia focuses on the privacy provided by the chotzer rather than the shmira of the chotzer. He's not being chelik with the previous tanam in the Mishnah, but he's simply ishtelin avek, another tanai that would make an area into a chotzer regarding this halacha. A chotzer that provides this level of privacy, this tznius, sets the chiyuv ma'aser, even if it doesn't provide the level of shmira mentioned by the previous tanam in the Mishnah. Rabbi Yossi Omer, Kol shenichnas lo ve'ein omer lo ma'ata mevakesh petura. Any chotzer that a stranger can walk in without being told what are you looking for is not going to be mechayev in ma'aser because it's not private enough. Even if the owner of the courtyard is not embarrassed to eat there, the fact that strangers can walk in without being challenged makes it not a private place. Rabbi Yehuda says if you have two courtyards, one inside the other, so that the people living in the inner courtyard must walk through the outer courtyard to get to the street. The inner courtyard is mechuyev, and the outer one is not mechuyev. The inner courtyard is considered protected because it can prevent people from the chatzer hachitzayna from coming in. But the outer one is not considered protected because it cannot prevent the people from the chatzer hapnimis from going through it to get to and from the street. The people on the chatzer hachitzayna cannot block the residents of the chatzer hapnimis from coming in because they have the right to go through the chatzer hachitzayna to get to and from the street. Mishnah Vav. Hagagis Pturim. Rooftops are not mechayiv in Meiser. They're not kavel Meiser. Meiser is brought up to them. Afal pishem shel chatzer hachayeves. Even if they're on top of a house in a courtyard that's mechayiv in Meiser, he brought the produce through the chatzer to the roof. Since he brought the produce into the courtyard with the kavana of taking it up to the roof to eat there, the chatzer is not going to be kavel Meiser. Beis shar achsadra umepesas, a gatehouse, which is a small structure in front of the entrance to the courtyard, or an achsadra is a portico, which is a covered porch with 3 walls and 1 open side. And umepesas is a walkway in front of the apartments on the 2nd floor of the building, and it's sort of like a porch also. They're like the chatzer that they're next to. If the chatzer is this type that it's mechayev in meiser, it's going to be kavel meiser, then these structures are also going to be mechayev in meiser. If the courtyard is not the type that is subject to the obligation, then they're also not subject to this obligation. These structures are considered to be extensions of the chatzer, therefore they have the same halacha as the chatzer that's next to them. Okay, Mishnah Zayin. Hatrifin v'abuginin v'elkoitiyos p'turim. A hunter's hut, field sheds, and summer huts are not mechayev. They're not kevel meiser for produce that's brought into them. These structures are not like regular houses, even if someone who lives in them, because they're not made to be lived in permanently. Sukkah's Ginoiser, a hut the farmers of the region of Ginoiser stay in during the season. What was that? Ginoiser was a very fertile area along the Kineres, which had very, very high quality of fruit that grew in large quantities. So farmers would stay there in huts throughout the growing and harvesting seasons. The farmers didn't live in that area; they came there during the season to take care of their gardens and orchards, and stayed in these huts while they were there. Even if he has a mill and chickens in it, it's still not subject because it's not a mokum kavua to live in. Meaning the mill and the chickens, that's sort of like a vise, that's sort of like a raya that would show that people live there, but the Mishnah is saying that Afal Pikein, it's not considered a livable place. Sukas hayoitrim, a potter's hut, which is a two-room hut, which a potter would live, work, and sell his products in, is as follows. So there were two rooms. A sukas hayoitrim is an area that has two rooms, like the Gemara Sukkah explains. The inner room, which serves as his bayis, the place where he lives, is machoy because it's a home. The outer room, which is his workshop, where he sells the produce, where he sells his products, is not subject to the chiyuv because it's not a place where he lives. Although a store is kevel meiser, as we learned in Parak Beis, the front room is not mechayev because it's meant for making pottery, not selling it. It's more of a workshop as opposed to a store. So produce that's brought into the cheder hachitzayna may still be eaten achilas arai, but the produce brought into the sukkah hapnimis is going to be chayev. Rabbi Yossi Aimer calls she'ena diras hacham diras hakshamim p'tura. Rabbi Yossi says any structure that's not fit to be used both as a summer home and as a winter home is not going to be mechayev. So a potter's inner room, the pnimis, is not fit to be used as a home in the winter. So even though produce brought into the inner room may be eaten as a snack, it may be eaten as a snack according to Rabbi Yossi. Sukkah sachag b'chag. The sukkah on sukkahs is Rabbi Yehuda mechayev chachamim pater. Rabbi Yehuda considers it enough of a dira to be mechayev, but the chachamim hold it's not, because Rabbi Yehuda holds in Hilchos Sukkah that a sukkah has to be a diras keva, right? So he's mechayev a sukkah to have mezuzah, right? So he considers it a residence with regard to meiser as well, and at least during sukkahs itself. The chacham, on the other hand, is diras arai. So if it's diras arai, it will not be mechayev, and it can continue with achilas arai of meiser. Mishnah Ches, Te'ena she'emedes b'chatz, or fig tree standing inside a courtyard, oichel achas achas u'pater. The owner may pick and eat one fig at a time and is not mechuyev to separate meiser from it. V'imsir if chayev, but if he combine two more figs, he's mechuyev to separate meiser before eating them, because the two figs together are considered processed, gemar melocha, and the chatzar is kevel meiser. Achas b'mina, v'achas b'smaila, v'achas b'piv. Even if he takes one fig in his right hand and one fig in his left hand and a third one in his mouth, he's not mechuyev to separate meisers for them because they're not considered combined in this way. According to the Tanakama, though, as long as he picked the second fig before eating the first one, it's considered a gemar malacha. Allah l'rayshai, if he climbed up to the top of the tree, he may fill his lap with figs and eat them there. The top of the tree is not considered to be within the chatzar, therefore the figs may be eaten there as a snack, even if they've been combined. We look at the figs as if they grew outside the chatzar, and they may be eaten like hilas arai, even if many were picked at the same time, since nothing was kevea l'maizer in this way. Mishnah Tes. Gefen she'im netua b'chatzar. If a grapevine is planted in a chatzar, nardlas kol eshkol. He may take a whole cluster of grapes from the vine and eat it without taking off meiser. Although a cluster has many grapes on it, we look at the entire cluster of grapes as one chelik, as not a combination of many individual grapes. V'chein b'rimayin v'chein b'avtiach. The same is true for a pomegranate that grows in a chatzar, and the same is true for melon that grows in a chatzar. Although pomegranate consists of many individual seeds, and a melon consists of many pieces, a melon is usually sliced into several pieces before being eaten, so a whole melon could be viewed as a collection of several pieces, as we mentioned earlier as well in Parak Beis. So a whole pomegranate and a whole melon may be picked and eaten without separating meiser. Divrei Reb Tarfon, as they talk to Reb Tarfon, Reb Kiva Omer, Reb Kiva says, "Megarga ba'eshkolos u'parit b'rimay v'seifis b'avtiach." If you want to eat from these fruits without separating meisers, you must pick one grape at a time from the cluster while it's still attached to the vine. Pick out one seed at a time from the pomegranate while it's still attached to the tree, and cut off one thin slice at a time from the melon while it's still attached to the ground. Since these peiros are usually divided into pieces before they're eaten, Rabbi Kiva considers removing an entire cluster, a whole pomegranate or melon, to be combining two or more fruits. This makes them a chuyiv meiser, and asers eating them achilas arai until you're mafresh meiser. Kuzbar shehizrua b'chatzar. If coriander is planted in a chatzar, mekartam ala ba'oichel, mekarav only if at a time and eat it without separating ma'aser v'emtzir chayv. But if he combined 2 or more leaves together, he's mechuyev in ma'aser before he eats them. The Mishnah teaches that even though these kuzbar leaves are not the main part of the plant, if you use them and combine them, they are mechuyev in ma'aser. Hasiya v'ha'ezay v'ha'kornish shabachatzer. If savory, hyssop, or oregano are growing in the chatzar, if they're being protected by the owner, that he's careful that they don't be taken by anybody else, they're mechuyev ma'aser. Since these plants grow wild without being planted, they're often left unprotected by the baila. The unprotected produce is not going to be mechuyev ma'aser, as we learned in the Klal Amru in Parak Aleph Mishnah Aleph. So unless the owner makes a point of protecting them, they are not mechuyev in ma'aser. Mishnah Yud. If a fig tree stands inside a courtyard, or one of its branches leans over into a garden outside the courtyard, he may stand in the garden and eat the figs growing over it in the usual manner, even 2 or more figs at once, and he's not mechuyev to separate ma'aser before eating them as a snack. Since these figs did not enter the chatzar, they didn't become mechuyev ma'aser when he picked them. If the tree is standing in the garden and leans into the chatzar, then the chatzar will be keveh for ma'aser in this case. If the tree stands in the garden and leans over into the chatzar, so one of its figs hang over the courtyard, he may pick those figs and eat them one at a time without being mechayev in ma'aser. But if he combines 2 or more figs, he's mechuyev to separate ma'aser for eating them. Achilas, even achilas arai, since these figs are in the chatzar, they're mechuyev ma'aser as soon as they're picked and combined. Okay. If a tree is standing inside Eretz Yisrael and one of its branches leans outside Eretz Yisrael, or it stands outside Eretz Yisrael and is leaning into Eretz Yisrael, everything goes after the location of the tree's trunk. If the tree's trunk is inside Eretz Yisrael, all of its fruits are considered to have grown in Eretz Yisrael. And if the tree's trunk is outside Eretz Yisrael, all its fruits are considered to be peres lutzaret. Since the tree's nourishment is drawn from the ground by its trunk, the entire tree is considered to be located where the trunk is. The next halacha that the Mishnah is going to say is talking about houses inside a walled city in Eretz Yisrael. The Torah teaches that when a house inside a walled city is sold, the seller has the right to buy it back for a period of 1 year after the sale. Once that year passes, he can no longer force a buyer to sell back to him. A tree inside Batei Arei Chaima has the same halacha. So the Mishnah now teaches the halacha for a tree that's partially inside a Arei Chaima and partially outside a Ir Chaima. So if the tree's trunk is within the city's walls, the entire tree is considered to be within the walled city, and even if the branches are hanging outside, it can only be put back within the first year. If the tree's trunk is outside the city's walls, the entire tree is considered to be outside the walled city, even if the branches hanging inside may be put back at any time. Since the entire tree is nourished through the trunk, all of it's considered to be wherever the trunk is. But when it comes to Ir Miklot, everything goes by the location of the branches, not by the trunk. If either the tree's trunk or branches are within 2,000 amos of the Ir Miklot, the entire tree is treated as if it's within that area. So it's going to be also for the victim's relatives to attack the Reitzeach if he is under any part of the tree that's partially within 2,000 amos of the Ir Miklot. The Torah says that when someone kills B'Shegeg, so then the Reitzeach B'Shegeg has to go to Ir Miklot, where he's protected from the Goyal Hadam. However, if he steps out of the city, the relatives may kill him. They may take revenge. In regard to this halacha, an area of 2,000 amos around the city is considered part of the city. So the Mishnah teaches the halacha for a tree that's partially within 2,000 amos of the city and partially outside. The last halacha is Yerushalayim hakol helech achar hanoif. Similarly, with regard to Yerushalayim and Meister Sheni, everything goes by the location of the branches as well. If part of the tree is inside the city and part of it's outside, we treat the entire tree according to the stricter position. Meister Sheni may not be eaten at either part of the tree, as if it's all outside the city, nor may we be parted at either part, as if it's all inside the city. It makes no difference which part of the tree was inside the city and which part was outside. Either way, and we end up being more machmir ad kan.